former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Mayor de Blasio, thank you so much for joining us. So, as I just laid out, the United States has seen its fair share of political violence across history, but lately the number of incidents does seem to have skyrocketed. What do you think it would take to de-escalate, to get whether it's politicians or media outlets that benefit from the escalation, from increasing conflict, to cool the temperatures?
Catherine, it's a powerful question. I think the first thing we have to think about, quick context. I mean, this is very troubling, but if you compare it to the USA in 1968, when we had assassinations of some of the most important figures in our society, and we had constant conflict and violence in cities all over the country, we're in a bad place, but we've been to a much worse place, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think the first thing we need to do is have our leaders take the temperature down. We're not expecting to see that from President Trump, unfortunately. He has, more than anyone, given the permission structure for this reality. And even what we've seen in the last week in Los Angeles, sparked by a kind of state violence, by ICE being extremely aggressive in their approach to immigration enforcement, that created a response from protesters, most of them peaceful. And then, of course, we saw some who were not peaceful. And I want to emphasize that's not acceptable. Protesters being violent is not acceptable either. But there's a cycle here of the most important leadership in the country, both in the words he uses and the actions he's authorizing, creating an environment that's becoming more violent, more conflictual. I don't expect him to change. I do think we can call upon people in the Republican Party to start finding their consciences and take the temperature down in a meaningful way.
Mayor de Blasio, the U.S. Capitol Police reported 9,400 investigated threats last year. Do you believe our government realistically has the infrastructure, the resources to keep elected officials safe right now?
Antonia, it's a very powerful question. I will tell you the truth. In my 8 years as mayor of New York City, and I had tremendous protection with the NYPD, but I always knew they could only do so much. And I think when you think of all the legislators out there, all the members of Congress, the fact is they're not protected enough. Let's be honest. That said, law enforcement's ability to identify threats and proactively stop them is pretty extraordinary. There's so many examples of terrorism and other types of activities that never happened because of the intelligence gathering of law enforcement. So I think the truth is people in public service have a right to feel vulnerable right now and need to take precautions. I think all of us who have been or are in public service have to keep doing our work and not be intimidated, because I think this is exactly what Donald Trump and some of the people around him want, is an atmosphere where people shirk and shy away from their service. We certainly saw that with the election workers who felt under threat in 2020 and 2024, but thank God kept at their post and kept doing their work. So the true answer to your question is no, people are not safe. Law enforcement can do a lot to help, and we need, in fact, even more help when there are those threats. But even with that reality, we have to keep doing our work. We can't let an atmosphere that's trying to destroy democracy and undermine people's willingness to go out and serve the public, we can't let that rule the day.
Mayor de Blasio, do you believe there's a correlation between how efficiently our democracy and our government runs and the risk of political violence, that when people out there who feel a sense of desperation, and by no means is this a justification, but I'm thinking of Luigi Mangione, who killed in cold blood the CEO of a healthcare company. Do you believe when people don't have any political outlets, when the government or the system is not representative of the will of the people, these lone wolves, these self-radicalized people, then resort to this type of violence? Or do you believe this type of violence will always exist in our society, no matter how efficiently our system of governance works?
There's always been, through history, a correlation to the political moment and whether society is serving people or not. That does not mean, and that's never a justification for political violence. And it doesn't mean there won't be, of course, there will be lone wolves in any time. But let's look at, the facts. In the times in American history that were much calmer, where there was much less violence. We've seen many of those times in the post-World War II era. And then we saw 60s was a time of great political violence, these last years as well, where the level of political conflict intensified, and of course, where there were those voices giving a permission structure. In the 60s, don't forget, it wasn't just the assassinations, it was the Ku Klux Klan. It was the fact that civil rights protesters were met with state violence by local sheriffs. What happened to freedom riders in the South. I mean, this was either authorized by state actors or off-duty state actors in many cases. So this stuff doesn't happen accidentally. There's powerful forces behind it in many cases. But I think it's also fair to say that when the public in general feels a society is serving them, when there's a sense of belonging, when there's a sense of people being included and respected, it takes the temperature down. It gives less oxygen for fringe elements or violent elements to exist. And I think we can get back there. But it will take, bluntly, defeating Trumpism and taking away that permission structure that it's created and showing people that there can be a path to a society that's inclusive once again.
To what extent do you think tech companies and our information ecosystems in this era are responsible for this?
They're extraordinarily complicit, and they're complicit for profit. And this is what pains me the most. I understood at the beginning sort of the tech revolution and the idealism in Silicon Valley, the notion that maybe this would be a democratizing element. Well, it's proven to be only about profit for big tech. They don't care how much social destruction they do. I don't care how much invasion of privacy, how much surveillance, you go down the list. Right now, I don't understand how tech executives sleep at night knowing that their tools are being used to foment violence and they don't make any honest effort to moderate that or address that. But let's face it, people are profiting off of the desire of some to create a violent atmosphere.
So I keep coming back to what are the incentives that our political leaders face, given that we have this social media environment where you get the most clicks, you get the most retweets, you get the most views. If you dunk on someone, if you humiliate your enemy, I think that there are a lot of, it's not only about the platforms, right? It's about how we give into the platforms and how they shape our motives. How do you lower the temperature when politicians see that the best way to get media coverage, the best way to go viral is to basically exploit conflict? I don't know how you change those incentives. It's not just about the platform itself. It's about what it brings out in people and what behavior is rewarded.
Well, Catherine, you're right. That's the way things are structured right now. I think at the same time, that has not stopped a number of leaders from getting plenty of attention from being positive and more visionary. I think it's been very interesting in the last couple of months who has sort of risen up in the public imagination as leaders who are confronting this moment productively. And it has not been the name callers. You look at governors around this country who have been given a lot of respect, I think, for addressing these really difficult circumstances, whether it's, climate change and natural disaster with an Andy Beshear in Kentucky, or whether it's J.B. Pritzker talking about taking on intolerance, or Gavin Newsom addressing the ICE raids. They haven't done it with name calling back and sort of doubling down on negativity. Even here in New York City, this mayor's race, I think it's absolutely fascinating. The energy that's now flowing, particularly to Zohran Mamdani, who's running a positive campaign, not a nasty campaign. So I actually think there is a lot of space for people to work in social media in a more productive vein and kind of reject that constant culture of attack. Even if it is, I agree with you, even if it is what's being encouraged, I don't think it's the only way.
All right, former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Mayor de Blasio, it's great to see you again. Thank you so much.